Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 2021 ITE Rural ITS Town Hall. My name is Steve Latosky, Director of Mojave County Public Works in Arizona, and John Hansen, who is a subject matter expert in transportation with Olson and I, will serve as moderators for today's session. Before we get started, I would like to go over some housekeeping items. ITE would like to thank champion sponsors Gannett Fleming, Siemens, and Transsoft Solutions for their support of the conference, Kimley Horn for sponsoring this week's sessions. In today's session, we will have a speaker presentation first, followed by speaker Q&A, and most of the town hall dedicated to discussion. We encourage you to type your questions into the question pane as they come to mind throughout the session, and we will address as many as we can through the town hall discussion. If the session ends before all questions are answered, some of us, the speakers as well, may be able to answer additional questions in the Wonder Room after the session. To access Wonder, go to the conference platform where you selected this session and select Hallway Talk, then go to the Technical Sessions area. At the end of the session, we will confirm which speakers can spend a few additional minutes in the Wonder Room after the session. Please note that because this is more of a town hall discussion type format, there are no PDH credits provided for this session. So I would like to start the town hall with a presentation giving an outstanding context on rural ITS evolution. For today's session, we have Jamie Sullivan, the Director and of the National Center for Rural Road Safety at Western Transportation Institute at Montana State University. Jamie will initiate the town hall with a presentation on the past, present, and future of ITS. Detailed speaker bios are listed on the website under the session description. Now let's hear from Jamie.
Perfect, thank you very much. I just want to make sure that you can see my screen and hear me okay as we get started.
Yes.
Perfect. I first want to start off by thanking NRITS and ITE for asking me to speak to open up this town hall. I'm very excited today to provide a brief historical perspective of rural and small community ITS, just to kind of remind us of where we've been as we head into today's discussion on where we're going in the future. So if you're joining us today, I see a good number of you joining us. Most likely you either live or work in a rural area or a small community. But for those who maybe don't, I wanted to start off by sharing just a few stats to help us tell that rural story. So about 70% of road miles in the United States are rural, while only about 19% of the population is rural. In addition, we know that about 44% of rural passenger vehicle traffic is actually urban residents who are traveling to destinations outside their homes, so those who are exploring the rural areas. As far as safety statistics go, we also know that about almost half of fatalities, 45%, occur in rural areas, and that our fatality rate in the rural areas is 2 times greater. So these statistics just show some of the rural and urban differences that we have, but many times it really isn't a one-to-one comparison. And many times the rural areas face different constraints and challenges than urban areas. We lack the funding, we have larger geographical areas of coverage, less staff resources, and a lack of communications infrastructure as well. And then have different travel characteristics, such as less recurring congestion, more extreme weather, and higher speeds. And all of these different factors really are reflected in the rural ITS timeline that I'm going to show here in a second. So as we start looking at this timeline, this started a few years ago. So just a quick shout out to Steve Albert if he's in the audience today. He's a pioneer in rural ITS and had put together the beginning of this rural ITS timeline for us. And as ITS was getting started in the early 1990s, we saw right before that there wasn't a whole lot of emphasis put on rural areas. Really, ITS was being deployed mostly in urban areas. And as we got into phase 2 in the early 1990s and the early 2000s, we did see that some of those urban ITS systems that were starting to find their way into rural areas And so we can see some of those like changeable message signs and 511. And as we were deploying those in rural areas, we really had to put the rural lens on those ITS devices and see how they could be translated into a rural area from urban. So in many cases, dynamic message signs were used to show weather information, and the same thing with 511. As it really began being put into rural areas, it started off as weather conditions and forecasts rather than the congestion type of information that was being shown in urban areas. As we got into phase 3, which was from about 2000 to 2010, we saw there were pilot developments and deployments of custom rural ITS systems that were starting to show up. So using road weather information systems in conjunction with changeable message signs to put out some of those messages. We started seeing automated vehicle location systems for snow plows so that we knew where they were and also could put that type of information in 511 systems. We started to see some of the weather variable speed limits that started to pop up as well. In phase 4, we really started to see rural ITS more widely deployed, and this was for about the last 10 years. In addition, we've seen a lot of more integration and a lot more pilots that have come about as well. So some of those multi-state integrated systems that are showing up, as well as vehicle to infrastructure type systems like traffic management centers that are now starting to pop up in rural areas, covering mostly state and state highways. And then we've seen a lot of vehicle and fleet probes, such as the new Wyoming DOT connected vehicle pilot that's collecting information and big data out on the roadways. We've also seen some things such as Waze, and the crowdsourcing that's being done in urban areas has also been integrated into rural areas as well, with some exceptions where they're having to make some of the changes based on what we know happens in rural areas. So with not as many people traveling through them, they've made some exceptions to the amount of data that's needed to be able to put out the rural information. In addition, we've seen some fabulous new pilots that have come up just in the last couple months, such as this automated vehicle that's being deployed and tested right now in Yellowstone National Park that showed up in the top right-hand corner. So I just talked a little bit about the different technologies that have changed over the few years, but now I really want to also bring us back to what's happened through this rural community and what all of us have accomplished over those phases. And so really, if you look at this, the Rural ITS Conference began quite a long time ago, and next year it will be about the 30th year of this. And there have been a lot of different resources that have come out, and a lot that this rural community has done to continue to make rural continue to and deployment support. So we've seen, as I mentioned, the Rural ITS Conference beginning about 30 years ago, the Advanced Rural Transportation Systems Program. There was a Rural ITS toolbox that was created to show support and explain to rural communities what they could deploy. And then in phase 3, in those 10 years at the beginning of the 2000s, there was a Rural Safety Initiative that started. In the last 10 years, we've had quite a bit that's gone on. There's a multi-state corridor management and operations initiative that happened. An ITS e-primer with a module on rural ITS was created. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, Wyoming was selected for the connected vehicle pilot to ensure that rural was one of those options chosen out of the 3 pilots put out. The Rural ITS Toolbox has been updated. And then we also have had two NCHRP projects that have happened for rural issues. The Rural Transportation Issues Research Roadmap was created to help with understanding different research ideas and included several ITS options. And then there was initiating the systems engineering process for rural connected vehicles, which also has been completed and is currently undergoing review. So that report should be out here shortly. Lastly, in the last couple of years, there was a creation of the Complete Trip ITS for Us program, which is giving grants to help out with ITS to complete trips through transit. There's also an update and expansion of ITS's professional capacity building case studies for education use, and one of those new examples will be a rural example that will be released here shortly. And then there was the creation of TRB's Rural Transportation Issues Coordinating Council to, again, make sure that these rural transportation issues really get elevated on a national level. And so in the future, what's on the horizon, as I wrap up this really brief overview for you, because as we mentioned, the main goal of today's town hall is to get your input. In the future, what I hope and what I foresee happening is a lot of improving of broadband. This has been always a huge issue in rural areas, but has become even more elevated due to the COVID pandemic. And I also see that we will continue to find our niche in rural for what that looks like for connected and automated vehicles and how we really can use those technologies for our needs in the rural area. I do want to close out and just remind everyone that this week is Rural Road Safety Awareness Week. So we hope as you live, work, and explore along the rural road to zero, that you will help share some of the great messages that are going out this week on rural road safety awareness, including some ITS messages. So thank you, John.
You're welcome. Okay, I think Steve is going to take over now and add some more content and get the discussion going.
Thank you so much, Jamie. And at this time, I'll invite the participants to offer any questions they may have specific for Jamie and her presentation, if there are any. And as Jamie referred to, this is an ongoing discussion. This will be a fantastic town hall. And if there's any questions that anyone wishes to express for Jamie in the course of our discussion, again, feel free. But I'll turn then to the moderator slides, please. Next slide, please. So for everyone's reference, John and I put forth a few seed topics, if you will, for discussion to get those that are participating thinking about the overall concept of rural ITS. And where I'm seeing it is kind of moving toward a concept of what I call a smart highway. And we've heard that term before in numerous contexts and similar contexts for intelligent transportation systems, as well as autonomous and connected vehicles. So some general core activities, if you will, that surround the smart highway concept are: one, highway operators, the infrastructure, whether it's legacy or emerging technology infrastructure for sensing, monitoring, and traffic control, as well as humanized systems. Again, whether manual or automated, with or without artificial intelligence. These would be traffic management centers, automated systems, and expert systems. But where smart highways are taking shape is we're seeing substantial private sector participation, particularly in remote data sampling and processing, as well as travel information services to users through mobile devices. And lastly, bringing the parties together, both the operators and the private sector, we see the communications element. Operators, users, and third-party entities coming together through their independently owned and managed assets and services. The technologies are abundant. This may be microwave, wireless radio, fiber, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, cellular, 5G, and dedicated short-range communications. So John and I, as moderators, we just offer these potential seed topics for any of the participants now to jump in, give your perspectives on how, especially, and again, we really invite you to keep this in the context of rural, how a rural ITS is supporting this evolution towards moving rural highways to smart highways.
And Steve, I think if I could just jump in and help elaborate a little bit on some of this as we wait for some of the questions to come in. Certainly infrastructure right now is receiving a lot of attention, both for the urban and for the rural highways. The issue always in rural is the communication and power requirements to do much of this. But actually, if you look at some of the infrastructure issues to accommodate some of the smart corridors and the use of connected autonomous vehicles, we are starting to see the industry as a whole come in and start to identify what those infrastructure needs are. Areas like additional width of striping and pavement markings to help with the systems that drive those applications, and also sharing of that information back to the traveling public. But there's just a growth, an explosion, if you will, in this area that is anticipated. Wanting to see where that is going to land in the rural areas is something we're all kind of watching very closely. With that, I have a question here, and I'm going to read it to the panel. What are the chances of CV emerging from its current regulatory morass? Great question. Steve, as a public servant, maybe you could take a stab at that first and give us your thoughts on that.
Yes, kind of looking at the near future. Some of the concepts that I see with regard to two-lane highways or just rural highways in general, evolving toward the smart highway function. And John, you hit on a couple of real basic things, but yet so critically important. One of the items that we just recently adopted was a 6-inch standard, coincident to the forthcoming MUTCD release for 6-inch edgeline and centerline striping. We also see a tremendous demand for accurate and timely traveler information to so many destinations that are often linked through our rural 2-lane highways. And so those are some of the elements that really lay the demand and the need, so to speak, but making them a reality, it's really where the communications comes in, and ensuring that those facilities are adequately served with the communications that can make that all possible. And we will hear, and perhaps I really hope that we hear from some of the audience on some of the maintenance and operations ends, some of the things that may deter agencies, especially smaller agencies, and I don't want to overlook tribal as well, is the maintenance burden of certain systems that may be brought online. But that can be solved, quite effectively through interagency agreements, or maybe even partnerships with a state agency in providing those types of services.
And I would add too that I'm taking this CV to reflect commercial vehicles. We all have seen a huge growth in the mix of commercial vehicles, especially in rural areas. There are some interstates in the West now that are reporting greater than 80% of the vehicles on their highways are commercial vehicles. That is a huge increase. So we're starting to take a look at how to facilitate commercial vehicles into the mainstream of those. This summer, there's going to be there's a coalition of states. Let me back up and say there's a coalition of states on I-10 between California and Texas that are taking a look at some of the needs around commercial vehicles. One of those is platooning, and they're going to start to delve into that aspect of commercial vehicles. But the morass that's reported to here in regulatory is certainly a big part of that. We know that the commercial vehicles are coming to the table, if you will, of transportation. They recognize the important role they have and the role we have, and we're looking to work together to resolve some of these things. The futures right now, these things need to be discussed and looked at and managed to their fullness now. And that includes some of the areas that are anticipated to take place in the near future with the expansion of home delivery services to the rural area. may potentially play an important role in helping us with areas such as incident management, first responder notification, and other important aspects of what we need to help facilitate the uniqueness of our rural highways.
I think the question as well delves into CV connected vehicles, and some of the forward-looking preparation that we're doing, at least on a county local level, is toward the traffic safety element, and staying basically in tune and ready to take action as the community. And I know the individual was referring to kind of the current regulatory and getting certain standards in place so that we can have a uniform means by which architecture, if you will, specification toward rolling out certain vehicle to infrastructure, or even vehicle to vehicle, as the auto industry has been working on connected vehicle type of applications. But again, back to the local agency perspective, what we're particularly interested in is utilizing vehicle to infrastructure technologies, whereby we could even activate a simple roadside traffic warning sign for, say, curves and other types of elements that especially visitors may not necessarily be attuned to, and incorporate those into the overall connected vehicle driving experience. So we're very much looking forward to the current stakeholder collaborations and regulatory issues being resolved in the near future. And I would invite anybody else in the town hall, any of the participants, that will give us a little bit better perspective on that.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to ask the same thing. Before we go on to the next slide, maybe, Steve, just to put a little bit of a cap on this question and talk about, as we all know, safety is the top of the list of everything we do. If you look at the history that Jamie shared with us, we've become a lot more aware of the needs in the rural environment, the rural area, the rural initiatives. But I think it's safe to say we're just starting to really delve into that area and get to know those issues. So one of the things we need to consider and ask ourselves are, what are the barriers to rural transportation needs? And maybe have you think about that as an audience. We can come back to that. But Steve, maybe we could go ahead and go on to the next slide.
Yes, please. So, question for the participants, and would certainly invite their perspectives. Are smart highways an emerging road functional class? Traditional classes, arterial, collector, and local roads, but smart highways in the context of building out a network of federal, state, and then local roadways. Should smart highways be considered as a functional class on their own?
This is a new subject, new topic, and for some of you, it may be somewhat new, but I think Steve is making a great point in identifying, when we go back and talk about, again, the rural environment, most of that rural environment is not our freeway system, our interstate system. It's your two-lane highways. And the smart highways and the smart play here for all of us to understand is we need to incorporate that too, that aspect of the transportation system into our thinking. Whereas we have more capabilities potentially on the freeway systems, the need for those in the rural areas is no less important, but the communication and power we talked about earlier are certainly a big question mark for those areas. I don't see any questions. Perhaps we can move on to the next slide then.
Yes, please. And this is potentially the most dynamic and near-term consideration with the plethora of especially third-party private suppliers of mobile-sourced information. So the concept is this, especially in the, I'm using traveler information, which is really the focal of the service delivery here. We're used to, as highway operators, the infrastructure source, a traditional changeable message sign, programming and monitoring from a traditional traffic management center, but emerging over the course of the last number of years has been mobile sourced traveler information. And some of the things that I hope that we could hear from the participants would be consideration of, one, timing and accuracy of real-time condition reporting, first from the highway operator and then from the mobile sourced service provider. And again, mobile source being a subscription based, that would be largely through cell phones, and emerging would be actually in-vehicle receipt of mobile source information. Another concept to consider is the cooperation and collaboration of stakeholders owning and controlling assets and services that collectively provide this traveler information. I look overseas at Europe, and I'm seeing evidence of the government agencies in Europe exploring formal agreements with private sector entities and coordinating that access to and distribution of traveler information. And then the last one, and really this can be very powerful, but also invite certain shortcomings, and that would be meshing the information that is obtained through the highway operator, the infrastructure sourced assets, as well as the mobile sourced information, meshing that in the context of measured and as well predictive condition information. So a lot to digest, but I think this is something that is already front and center in supporting the smart highway operation. And we know, especially from the mobile devices, that travelers are actively utilizing that private sector information on that subscription basis.
Yeah, I think, and if we look at all three of these areas, Steve, I think we can quickly just elaborate on each one of them a little bit. So going back to the mobile sourced area, traditionally in the past, we have seen, at least in focus on rural transportation specifically, pretty much that's been housed within the DOT area, usually within the traffic management center or traffic operations center. And how it's manifested to the traveling public is really through systems like 511, where you would source that number, get the latest road report, weather report, information for your highways. But with the advent of technology today and the information is collected, this again is exploding. So first of all, the traffic management centers are really now across the country looking at digitizing and upgrading their systems to reflect this and be a source of information, but not the only source that would be contributing that information. So you have that going on. The infrastructure source, I'm going to let Steve maybe elaborate a little more on that one, and then I'll pick up on the last part here.
The infrastructure source, that speaks more to the legacy type operations. That is your hard traffic sensors, the traditional detectors that highway operators have historically used to present certain travel condition information, and over the years have expanded that to even predictive information on travel times from point A to point B. So that was always kind of the backbone, where it would address more so the en route travel experience as opposed to the pre-trip travel experience. But as John intuitively noted, the pre-trip travel experience was very skillfully captured through 511 systems, and certainly the old traditional route the on-air radio and television traffic reports. But those would be primarily dialed into and linked to the highway operator, either through TMC or other means by which it would just be those highway sensors that would be driven. And we're seeing a little bit of evolution, incorporation of emerging technologies. And John, I don't know what you're seeing on your end, but and I definitely would like to hear from the participants, the incorporation of AI, artificial intelligence, and utilizing either historical data woven with real-time condition data towards predicting and sharpening those future travel times or potential areas where we could see some congestion development. Again, I got to stick with this conversation more towards a rural concept, but where we have some rural highways that service particularly high volume generators. I'm speaking more special events or big venues that sometimes are accessed outside of more populated areas. This is where these types of technologies can evolve towards making for a better management of demand on the rural highway.
Now, certainly we have a lot of good information around our urban environments, more cameras, more detection, more information to share, less so in the urban area or the rural areas. But again, the importance of getting from point A to point B, the probability is going to be that the vast majority of your trip is going to be through rural highways when you're taking a long trip. Then you start to look at what else is taking place. The advent of connected autonomous vehicles is certainly going to expand the information back into the vehicle. There's different generations of that kind of automation. It's already a part of our vehicles. But now we're also talking about the electric vehicle and the impact that's going to have. And I don't think we yet see the impact in rural America. Our role and our part of that depends on what state you're in, quite frankly. Some look at that much more in depth than others do. Some states are in the process right now of not only identifying where to put charging stations for EV, but they're actually out putting those in. But from a trip time information standpoint, as we become more mobile after COVID, and those of us that are using that kind of means to get around, we're really starting to take more interest in, that kind of information as well. All that said, there's a real need to have the information as available to us as it can be real time back into the vehicle. More than ever before, we depend on that kind of information each time we hop in our car and take a trip. It usually starts with our destination point, put that information in, and let the information drive us to our destination. And we have to rely on that, obviously, quite a bit. I don't have any questions that came in, so maybe we could go on to the next slide.
Well, as it relates to more operator type of need, if you will, in bettering the facility function, performance measurement. And what we would really encourage is any participants that have any questions to express those as relates to any obstacles they have seen with regard to data availability, accuracy, data management systems, and the expense for collection and management. Emerging methods and technologies that may address some of the obstacles include big data applications, those that are sourced to a third party. We talked and touched on AI applications, but moving back to big data, one of the things that I do want to express, especially in the rural context, is users need to beware and use due diligence in the data that they obtain. There are studies out there, especially with regard to more rural highways, low volume highways, that big data applications that are potentially better suited for metro areas, highway network, freeway network management, in metro areas may not necessarily have the level of detail and accuracy to really well express conditions at the rural level on such low volume roads. Others may be able to address that adequately. It's kind of more of a sampling thing. Jumping down the geographic information systems, again, I just want to cover these topics, but I would like to open up for any participant reaction on any of these. Geographic information systems is a very interesting backbone application toward inventorying all of the smart highway assets. We didn't even talk about IoT devices, real-time sensor devices that can be incorporated for real-time condition type of information. But GIS systems, they can be utilized to take the data that any of these types of devices may collect, and you can actually do some very powerful processing of that data towards maybe predicting future near-term future type operations. So the IoT-enabled sensors, coupled with a good robust backbone system such as GIS, could be kind of the next tier, towards really making for a robust, facility management.
I got a question here I'm going to bring up. It's timely to talk about this. It's a long one, so let me get through it and then we can discuss it. But agencies interact with and are excited about the use of mobile source data to understand operational conditions on rural highways. It is hopeful alternative to having to get power and communications out to hold on here, just get a snapshot of a simple spot. However, they found that it continues to be difficult to get reliable information into rural areas, especially as you get off of the interstate system. I'm curious if any agencies have found valuable sources of data, or at least if they are an improvement in the accuracy of data over time. You're really hitting on a difficult subject there. As you can see, in the rural area, the information that we collect is just a real snapshot, as you pointed out, of what is really going on. That is part and parcel to I guess, the problem or the issue that is faced there, to have a bigger picture of what's going on out there. So contributing to that, of course, is the cost of implementing, managing, and maintaining those systems that collect that, but also having those systems strategically located to provide that information. Sometimes in rural ITS, we have to make compromises based around our availability for power and communication. So that, again, is kind of in the background too. But Steve, in your county, I know you've got, those are issues that you face all the time, and maybe you could just give us kind of a personal snapshot of how that affects your area.
Yes, as it relates to managing for traffic safety, and I've seen the question as well. We're very cognizant of trying to make for good coordination between the backbone state highway systems that feed our major, we call them the county, the backbone regional highway network on the county network, and trying to incorporate to the best of our abilities, factoring in our facilities being one, alternate routes. We're actually starting off at a low level with some static signing for such coordination, but we are progressing into trying to coordinate better with the state, and we're in Arizona, so that'll be Arizona DOT, toward, and it's always been my vision towards incorporating some of the county regional highways into the state 511, so that we can have more of a seamless, opportunity to share condition information between the county network and the state network, so travelers can make informed decisions. I often think that one of the things that are so ripe for incorporation of technology is trying to give travelers the most information that they can gain in traveling, say, a state facility, and this would be your interstate highways, your U.S. highways, and even state routes, on the condition and best routing, if you will, on the local roadways that would provide especially access to prominent destinations. So we're having those discussions, and this is where really I would like to see at a local level our system be able to mesh with more of a state highway system, and then turn to our partners at ADOT toward furthering the overall collaboration between all the stakeholders that facilitate, I'm speaking of private and public stakeholders, that facilitate the traveler information and related travel data, applications that we can tap into.
Yeah, one of the huge disadvantages that we have in rural areas is the management of a incident or a closure or a weather-related problem with our highways. There's just not a lot of alternatives on detours where we can send them and how to get them there safely and effectively, and communicate that back to the traveling public with effective. Now, there are all of us are aware of incidences that reflect this, but our options are really part of the discovery side of how we can manage an incident management effectively, what that plan looks like, and put that into place. I know, Todd, in Rural ITS as an organization, this is something we've discussed a lot and have used that to help generate regional discussions between agencies on just how we can effectively manage that, because the traveling public doesn't care really that much about whose jurisdiction they're traveling to. They just want to get from point A to point B as safely and effectively as they can. But when we pass off this information, or in the case of some events, have a closure take place on a highway, informing downstream and upstream, that information becomes very important to how we handle that incident management. Data is so critical, and the meshing and working with that data and pushing that out to everyone is extremely important. But having the memos of understanding of sharing that data are equally important. And a role that we are starting to see within rural ITS is working with agencies on a regional level to be able to facilitate that. I have go ahead, Steve.
Oh, John, I just want to jump in quick. There was a good question concerning agencies justifying the expense of acquiring emerging technologies in these applications. And basically, we approach it, one, how much is it? But two, if it's a safety type of device, and we've been very much working towards and equipping our roadways with a lot of actuated type devices. We do tap into Highway Safety Improvement Program funding, but on the other end, where it's purely just for traveler information and improving wayfinding to destinations, we justify it just simply in the premise of the utility and information, getting it in such a manner that we can confidently express it to laypersons in an accurate and timely manner. And generally, when we can make that type of demonstration in advance and making a proposal for new technology purchases, that is something that our decision makers can grasp, understand, and even tie to an economic benefit for, in our case, the county service. So that's how we kind of approach it, and find that be quite successful. There was another question, John, on data sources. Not sure. Have you seen any applications? Because I know it's something that we could do here at the local level for travel time monitoring. Be the Bluetooth application, sampling Bluetooth and doing piecing together those data samples to predict travel times, especially over more of an extended distance. I'm talking many miles for potential posting of travel time information. What have you seen, John?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think that one thing that is definitely out there that we need to talk about is who are our partners in this? Who else is should we have sitting at the table to ask these questions and be a part of the solutions? And certainly when you look at the huge increase in commercial vehicle and fleet management operations on our highways, many of those vehicles are monitored real time at a central location with a lot of trip time information, emergency management information. And I think what the future holds is, again, having them sit at the table to help us facilitate and manage that information. That's easier said than done because it takes a lot of cooperative effort to do that. But certainly the expansion of the players, if you will, that have a stake in rural transportation initiatives need to be expanded, and we can look at that. And then going back to the technology and the spending of funds on that, that's a tough one too, because the dollars are limited, as we all know. And it's not just the decision on the amount of or how we're going to spend that money in what areas. It's actually a big part in becoming a bigger issue to maintain and factor in the life of the equipment that we have out there and the replacement costs that are to be associated with that. So just a couple of ideas around that. I want to go back just a second, Steve, and talk about big data before we leave this slide. And we're aware as members of the steering committee with National Rural ITS, the questionnaire that was put out to the participants to get some feedback. And what we heard loud and clear was that data and communication are big issues facing rural America today. They are also the harder group to really address when we start looking at, really how we're going to do this, how we're going to get that last mile of communication out there, both in the rural setting for the data collection management side of things, but from a user perspective, it's even a bigger question. So with those two issues, data and what data, and how we're going to communicate that, I hope we can get a little more discussion from the participants on some of the areas that they are facing and concerns they have in that area. And I'd like to pick on Steve because he's a public servant. I am not, but I know he deals with this on a daily basis, and maybe just get your thoughts more specifically, Steve, on those two areas.
Well, thank you, John. And one thing I want to put out to the participants as well, really looking forward to hearing from them. Our last question actually expressed, quote unquote, excited about the use of mobile source data, but the question for our participants is, how can your agency or your operators per se in operating a facility, start seeing the same mobile source data, the same service that drivers are seeing. So that is kind of a big thing, and speaks to the collaboration and cooperation among stakeholders. So a service provider in the private sector that's providing information to travelers, how can the facility operator see that information the same way? But John hits on it, and this is really hitting at the heart of rural ITS. I talked about it at the start. It's really the procurement of and purchasing of devices and technologies, for rural facilities to elevate to more smart highway function, and then the maintenance element of it. And I think from the procurement side, possibly making it more simpler and streamlined for agencies, particularly smaller agencies, local agencies, is to look for and work with your procurement staff in identifying cooperative contracts. In many instances, we agencies, even if it's a big city agency, have a cooperative purchase contract by which another agency, even in an entirely different state, can piggyback on and procure those very services. So I know it is quite daunting when you start speaking of ITS and even from the concept of just simple CCTV and message boards for traveler information along a particular important corridor leading to a destination. To procure and write specifications for these types of devices. Many times agencies and practitioners, they know what they want, it's just how they get there. And look into the concept of cooperative contracting, as it does open up the avenue both for initial purchase, but namely for some maintenance services as well.
And I think one of the things that has really allowed rural ITS to sustain itself and grow over the years is the real cooperative effort. We understand fully that when we're competing for those competitive dollars and we're going against urban environments, urban areas, our issues are not maybe as loud or as well heard as those, but we've learned as a community to sit down and identify and clearly, I think, discuss what those issues are, and as a large voice, then go back to address those things on the level that they need to be addressed. And so I encourage you, as you test drive or look at the rural ITS group, also look at this as a very strong advocacy group that comes together. Yes, we talk about best practices and share that information, what's been working well, maybe what's not working quite as well. A lot of experience-based discussions around that, but also to be a large block of users that have a common ground and common understanding of the issues, and again, sharing that so that we're a voice out there that can be heard.
And John, I kind of like to turn into another on a tangent, a discussion, and especially as it relates to rural agencies. It's easy to talk about traffic management centers and things that work very well in metro areas and operating freeways and managing traffic in that sense. But rural agencies simply don't have the staffing. How can agencies still in rural sense, and even if this could be even at the state level, successfully operate rural facilities, instrument them with ITS, but operate them effectively for the benefit of the traveling public? Is there a role, and perhaps we bring Jamie into the discussion as far as what she's seen, and particularly is seeing going ahead, the role of consultants in operating rural, highway facilities, and/or incorporating those facilities through an IGA or otherwise into a state centralized traffic management center type operation. I know in Arizona, some of the outlying state facilities in northern and western areas of Arizona, eastern areas of Arizona are actually instrumented and controlled by a central traffic management center in Phoenix, and that may be the opportunity as well, either through IGAs with state agencies or other agencies, or bring in the consultant perspective in how these facilities can be one, instrumented to bring more of a smart highway function, but two, operated and maintained as such.
Yeah, I think it's, I'd like to bring Jamie back into the discussion with our remaining time. Let's kind of talk a little about what one of her last slides was, and that's the focus of where's rural ITS headed? I mean, what are some of the things that we see, all of us see on the horizon? You've heard some of that here today, but kind of open it up to that and hopefully have some participation in that as well. But I'd like to kick it off by saying that I think there is, across the board and nationally speaking, a real understanding that we need to open up our highway systems to a regional approach, not so much localized as has been in the past, which sometimes means some silos have to come down to be able to do that. But we have to work cooperatively and effectively as a community to do that. And my perspective on rural ITS, why I'm so excited about it, is this is a great forum for that to take place and to be able to have these kind of discussions with our peers and with the community that we serve to help identify really what that future needs to look like, and then be a part of the answering of just how we're going to do this. So I'll open it up to the group and maybe get Jamie to give her kind of perspective from her viewpoint standpoint.
Sure, thank you. And I want to go back to the workforce question a little bit that Steve raised. And with that, one of the things that we're seeing, I mentioned that ITS PCB is putting together or upgrading and expanding their current classes that they have for universities to use on ITS. And the hope there is that by incorporating specific ITS case studies right into undergraduate and graduate programs, that we can drum up more interest in not only those who want to be able to help deploy these systems, but also in maintaining and operating them. And so in doing so, with updating a bunch of those, I know there is the opportunity, and we have been looking at adding in rural examples where we can there as well, to make sure that people know that these can be used in rural areas and what some of the differences and challenges may be based on that. And then as far as when we talk about consultants, I think that as with many rural things that we do, consultants are a great expansion of resources for rural areas. And when there aren't a whole lot of staff available, there's also other things besides consultants as well. You have your universities that can help with some of the data analysis. You've got other programs such as your local technical assistance programs that are also available at no charge many times, that can help with some of these training opportunities where it comes from on the safety side as well as ITS side too. So Steve, I wonder, does your local agency ever use consultants, universities, your local technical assistance program to help with any of this ITS, or does most of that type of help lie on other jobs that you do?
Great question. We have actually had some small relationships with local universities, both in the Nevada area, but we have reached out and are quasi-engaged with the Arizona University Network. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that is an overlooked resource that really just takes a local agency practitioner to just pick up the phone and contact that university liaison, that may be able to provide those types of services, and often overlooked and very, very robust opportunity as well. And also doesn't hurt as well for an agency to maybe pick up an intern or so. We actually have one that may take who's working for us, that may take a county project and make it part of his master's thesis and master's research. So anything that we can work to especially better our staff and better someone's academic development, but also lend a tremendous benefit to the agency itself is very helpful. But I think at the end of the day, it still comes down to consultant services being a real good backbone, and job order contracting, indefinite quantity, indefinite delivery type contracts, can also be an awesome tool for a local government agency to be able to tap into when services are needed. So the contract's already in place, and it just becomes task order driven after that.
like to just jump in. We've got a couple of questions that came up, so I'd like to address those, but certainly continue with this discussion. And I'm going to take the first one. The question is, can you clarify which rural group was referred to a few minutes ago? Is it ITE? I'm going to give you just a quick history of the National Rural ITS group from the standpoint of who's kind of helping us as an organization and where that is now. Initially, ITS was the parent group that facilitated and helped continue the growth of the National ITS group. A few years back, that support was severed, and thanks to ITE, they stepped in and really picked up and gave a forum for the National ITS group. We are really grateful and will ever be grateful to ITE. But when you step back and think about it, it made a lot of sense because ITE represents operations and ITS is a big part of operations and other areas as well, maintenance and support and all the areas that quickly come to mind. So my regret to you is that I keep referring to it as ITS all the time, National Rural ITS. Maybe we'll have to, as a steering committee, take a look at this, but certainly want to acknowledge the fact that ITE is the group that is taken in under their umbrella or their support and continues to grow the group that's called ITS. The second one was, just says, I'm in agreement, but we have been talking about a regional approach and breaking down silos for years, and yet it doesn't happen. Do you have some thoughts on how to make this happen? And I must tell you that this is a conversation that some of us have had for many, many years. So I would like to throw that out to Steve and Jamie first to kind of get their comments, and then I'd like to throw in a little part at the end there. So, Jamie, from the your side, the breaking down of silos.
Yeah, it's definitely a hard thing, and it takes a lot of work to break down those silos. I am hopeful, and I didn't mention it in the future and what I hope for the future, but I am very hopeful that this will become much easier to break down silos, especially where we are starting to look at following the safe system approach. That is something that's been done internationally to try and get us to 0 fatalities and serious injuries. And we've brought that over to the US, and we're really starting to implement that. And the whole backbone of the safe system approach is to break down silos and to really all work together. And as Steve mentioned earlier, the first priority is safety. And so a lot of these ITS devices that are put out are safety related and to try and get our fatalities and serious injuries to 0. So while that doesn't give you an exact approach to break down the silos right now, or a great action item to start with, I am very hopeful that as we start bringing out this approach and really putting it into practice, that it's going to help break down those silos even more once we start talking to each other. So Steve, maybe you have some better action items.
I only wish I had a solution, because I must say, with my colleagues and peers at both the state level and throughout other counties and jurisdictions, I think we've broken down most of the silos in Arizona. And I say that only in the premise that, credit to the state. I was actually the committee chair, so to speak, and the state's 4-year updated their strategic highway safety plan. They're very animate about incorporating local agencies through the various COGs and MPOs across Arizona. We enjoy that relationship, and it is important, though, from a local agency perspective, that there is a little give and take, and what we try to do is stay active, and the key is to really buy into usually a state-driven process for both ITS architecture as well as the process by which certain funding mechanisms for improvements that could stretch into the local system, be adhered to. And but we've got strong relationships through our COG here in Northwest Arizona we got very strong relationships and regularly involve state officials at the administrative level. So we're talking about the decision makers at DOT through our county engineers network. We actually bring state DOT leadership into our board meetings so we can stay lockstep with the direction that the state is taking, so that we can take advantage of initiatives that the state is moving ahead on. And likewise, sometimes the state even takes cues from some of the local agencies' successes in advancing initiatives toward that, toward zero deaths, et cetera. Many of the safety initiatives, and this all weaves into rural ITS systems as well. So, we're not perfect in Arizona by any means, but we made those important strides, and I think we're getting a lot of good things done. And John, to your point, and thank you so much for your overview of the ITE Committee on Rural Intelligent Transportation Systems. Must give substantial credit to Doug Noble and Jeff Lindley, who I know are joining us in this town hall. Our focus is steadfast on making for forums such as this, even looking ahead towards a future standalone rural ITS conference again. We know the opportunity is there, and we know the participation and interest is extremely high. And so while we work towards getting past the pandemic period here, we're going to seek to do bigger and better things. And our work's only beginning, and this is going to be a process by which it's going to be, as I like to use the term, continuous improvement. And I think that is something that the committee, the Rural ITS Committee, strives for, and we're seeing it here even through this town hall discussion.
Yeah, I can only echo everything you just said and do that, Steve. Just to finish up too on this silo issue item, and you pointed it out very well. Agencies all across the country differ on their approach and how they view this, their cooperative effort. That's always been a part of the challenge and the excitement of being a part of the National Rural ITS group, is working through those items. But someone asked a question and pointed out an ITS champion. I think that if we were real honest in this discussion right now and talked about the different regions and use the word champion, we could probably point to a lot of individuals that we've all seen that are part of that. We need more of those. A lot of times we gain a lot of initiative, we start to move forward, things start to really happen, we lose that champion or champions. And when that happens, it's a setback. But certainly from a cooperative effort, I think this is probably more of a difficult thing to handle than just about any other area when you have those champions that, for whatever reason, step aside and the whole momentum factor starts to dwindle a little bit. We need to be aware of champions that are out there, include them and invite them to be a part of this discussion. And I think the growth of any portion of any subject matter we're talking about here needs to include those champions and identifying who they are and have them be a part of this. So kudos to that question that was brought up, with that thought that was passed along there. So getting back to the future. Jamie, I know you had a chance to address that before we went off and talked to those questions. Steve, from your perspective, from the public sector side of things, again, looking at rural, what do you see the future hold for ITS in the rural environment and the initiatives that are a part of that?
Well, John, I have worked our organization towards perfecting a network of changeable message signs so that we can remotely control those devices to provide timely traveler information, primarily, and it's been thundering here actually in the Northwest Arizona throughout the call, we're in monsoon season. So our first and foremost focus is on ensuring that we provide timely traveler information on any instances where even our regional highways are going to experience closures from time to time, due to severe weather type of impacts, including even winter weather impacts. I think from the ITS standpoint, incorporating devices that can attend to real-time road conditions as precipitated by ambient conditions, is something that we've already put smart devices in play for, and we continue to through a capital plan roll those devices out. So that's kind of the direction that we're seeing right now. But we're also very prepared, and I think this was again a great question from the top in terms of getting past this almost regulatory type stalemate on the connected vehicle type of initiatives, because we're very ripe and very eager to start budgeting for and starting rolling out those types of smart infrastructure devices that can communicate to connected vehicles via the dedicated short range communications or the like, or whatever is adopted, so that we can get primarily safer corridors. We have real issues. I came from solving congestion problems to solving safety problems, and we don't have a congestion problem in Mojave County. We have a safety problem, and we have a plethora of tourists that I say their mind is not necessarily focused on the driving task. It's to get where they want to be and enjoy that drive. And as a result, we unfortunately see some instances of traffic crashes that probably speak to the lack of attention. But incorporating those smart devices for traffic safety, particularly in vehicle type messages, gosh, we're really looking forward to that, and we're going to be ready when that kind of hits the mainstream. And this is the type of environment, the Rural ITS Committee and these types of functions that we build upon. The information we extract from these events are tremendous, and we get a lot of things done from sharing amongst our peers.
And I just want to share, earlier we were talking about champions, and I want to recognize somebody, Steve Alpert, who's been a part of this organization for a very long time. He is and was and is and continues to be our champion. One thing he taught me, and it's very pertinent, I think, to this discussion, is you need to step back and look who the partners are in rural America, in rural ITS. And when we started having our conferences, and we started to have people from first responders, state police, hospitals, rural transit, I have to tell you, I was thinking, what in the world? Why are all these people? But Steve kept saying, you got to take a look at the table and who's sitting there. And you've got to understand who's affected by this, because we're all in this together, and we all have to understand that. So I think the future for us holds that we've got to really expand that and build on that, and recognize that as much as we'd like to have all of the answers, we don't. But collectively in sharing the issues, I think we can get to the conclusion we want to a lot quicker. And with the advent of technology and connected autonomous vehicles, EV, all these buzzwords we're hearing, all these applications we know about, all the more reason we need to widen that table and bring more people there. That runs risks, of course, but it also opens up the solutions to a lot broader perspective that perhaps can lead to other things that we need to be a part of this, such as funding and local and national support, and the areas that we need to continue to grow the national rural ITS initiatives will certainly come to bear. So with that, I was just checking to say I don't see any new questions that came in. So, and I know we're getting close to the end here, but we've talked about the future. Maybe we could just take a second to talk a little bit about what we just touched on a little bit. What are the barriers that we're facing to get to the future? And again, Jamie, if I could call on you first. And I'm sorry if this
Sure.
put anybody on the spot.
No, not at all. Just double muted. It's one of those things that we've all had to do throughout the pandemic, right? Make sure we're not double muted. No, I think for the barriers, there are lots that we've always seen throughout rural transportation, but I think the ones that are sticking out the most as we move forward in the future are the communications and broadband issue that Steve talked about. And I think that, as I mentioned in the beginning presentation, that really became even more apparent throughout COVID. And this is one of those instances of bringing in additional stakeholders. We saw other ways that broadband was affecting rural areas, not just in transportation through COVID. We found that it was really hard for people to work from home, that it was really hard for students to learn from home, that that there were big differences and a big divide, a digital divide, as we say. So really working towards that. And I think that because that's now been elevated, we're seeing over the last few months a lot of leaders who are understanding that that's a challenge and really putting their energy behind trying to fix that. So I'm hopeful for the future that will be easier, especially for us in transportation as well, and open up some opportunities. And then, as was also pointed out earlier, the succession and the workforce, and just really making sure that those coming up into the workforce know that ITS is the future, and really training them on how to design and operate, maintain these systems, and supporting those young people who are coming up in the workforce, and making sure that we're training them to be those champions that we're looking for, the next people that can succeed those of us who are already in really entrenched in this right now, and making sure that we have those people coming up behind us. So, Steve, did you have any thoughts as well?
That's excellent, Jamie, and actually to build upon your excellent remarks, I see it as 5 phases: plan, procure, construct, operate, and maintain. And to Jamie's points on communications, that is fundamental to the success of any rural ITS system, if you will, across a rural facility. The planning is getting the communications in place as backbone to being able to move ahead in developing a system. But then I touched on some of the potential elements of procurement, tying into cooperative contracts, and also partnering with other agencies, perhaps larger nearby cities that can take that on. We even at the county have IGAs in place for maintenance of some of our electronic devices, traffic signals, and the like. Many others on the call, I'm sure, in this town hall has similar structures. But then constructing, operating, and operating and maintaining speaks to the workforce element that Jamie touched on. So we, as a rural ITS committee, if you will, and utilizing functions such as this town hall and similar functions, we see our role as just pure practitioners, quite frankly, in maybe partitioning these steps: plan, procure, construct, operate, and maintain, into dedicated sessions that we can further this dialogue. So maybe in the future, John and Jamie, it's workshops dedicated to just the planning aspect, and other workshops dedicated to just the maintenance aspect, so that we can see the real options under each particular step, that perhaps, say, consultants and other solutions being the part. So I know it's a little bit difficult maybe in a town hall format to kind of speak, and we should be speaking. We have been so skillfully speaking. John, you're doing a great job bringing up many of these issues, the broad brush, but digging deep and going into the depth of each one of these. That's something that I think participants can look for from ITE and the supporting committees and the persons involved to advance those discussions individually.
Yeah, and I just elaborate a little bit on the side of the participation of this. It dawned on me, and I'll just share this with all of you, that the barrier may be that we need to know more about the rural audience, more about the wants and needs and expectations there that they have, because I think they exceed things that we haven't encountered what I'll call traditional ITS, or basically transportation deployments. So a good set of ears to be able to listen and hear, discern, and determine what needs to be addressed is a part of that. So your sessions about having planning, that's a different planning function, but the planning is from a traditional sense, but a planning around, getting to know who rural America really is in those transportation initiatives, I think will go a long way to ending those barriers that are there or maybe existing around that. So the portion that we might want to leave with now as we kind of bring this to a close is just to kind of give each of us a snapshot of what rural ITS has meant to us and our organizations, and also have an opportunity, quite frankly, to get out a sales pitch to those that are listening to participate and be a part of this community. I think that's real important to extend that offer to all of you, because as you can see, it's a big subject matter. The old adage is, if it can't be done in rural America, it can't be done anywhere. We certainly see that as being somewhat true. But just to get, again, your thoughts on that as we bring this to a close. So Jamie, you get to go first again.
Thank you. I think for me, when I was talking about the succession and the bringing up of new people to follow behind us as champions, that's really what this has meant, at least for me, is because I have had the great honor of coming up and being mentored by Steve Albert, who you mentioned earlier, and some of the other pioneers in rural ITS. And so I came into my profession really at the start of 511 and got to be able to see how that really all evolved, and how that began in Montana and some of the other states, and how it had to be different from urban. And so really getting to see all of that from the beginning has been amazing throughout my career, and seeing how that's progressed now to all of the amazing things that we're looking at towards the future. And again, how we can take some of those urbanized ITS devices and really use them in ways that speak to rural. And you were talking a little bit about what rural is looking for and what the needs and wants are. And so that's really, I think, how this is always occurred for rural ITS, is really figuring out which of those ITS pieces can be used in the right way for rural. And I've really loved being able to see that and being able to be a part of that research that's occurred and the training of new people behind me, and looking towards the future. So, Steve? I
think rural ITS, as a whole is a real challenge for practitioners, because there's really necessarily no cookie cutter solution. I think every rural facility has its own unique challenges and needs, quite frankly. What are you trying to do, in better servicing the traveling public? And that actually can weave into even the public transportation aspect and connectivity. So my perspective is such that we as not only the rural ITS committee, but practitioners as a whole, really benefit. And what I like to see is working towards, spotlighting successful, practices, persons that and agencies that have achieved success in applying a certain method or solution, or even, an actual ITS application device, etc. So maybe spotlighting those, and perhaps ITE and the committee, we can work towards an information clearinghouse of such that can spotlight those successes, because practitioners sometimes, when they see others that have achieved success in a particular area of need, they can at least not utilize it as a cookie cutter, but more as an adaptation toward what they're trying to achieve. So again, spotlighting more on that.
And I would just add, on a personal note, all of us have had mentors in our lives that have spoken to us. And I remember one I had told me a long time ago that, you know, you have to look at our highway system as a highway system that doesn't know boundaries as far as, you know, jurisdictions and those types of things. So my real heart in this whole thing, what really drew me to ITS from the very beginning, was breaking down those walls, so to speak, and looking at a transportation system that's truly regional and national, and the cooperative effort it's going to take to get things done to reflect the type of highway systems, safe highway systems that transport, you know, public goods and people to the point of the best we can be, I guess. Again, for me and with rural ITS and thanks to ITE, this is coming back again. I think we're starting to see champions. I think we're starting to really get focused. And it's almost like we've got a new breath of excitement that's taking place, not only in rural ITS, but in transportation as a whole, unlike anything I've seen in my career. So these are fun times, they're exciting times, but there are also times where we have to really learn to cooperatively work together to succeed, because it's going to take that kind of an effort. So I think we're kind of up against the clock here. I'm not sure how we bring this all to a close, but I'll start by thanking all of you for participating. This was when you go into these things, you think, gosh, what am I going to help promote here or you know, prevail here? It's always amazing to me that when I finish, I go, boy, did I learn a lot today. And for me today, I can say that. So thanks to all of you for that. And Jamie, I'll pass it on to you.
And I just, again, also want to thank everyone for listening today and thank ITE for asking me to speak at the beginning and being a part of the panel. I appreciate that. And I look forward to where we go in the future with rural ITS and rural safety. So, Steve?
And I would like to thank ITE for putting this session on. I think it was a very important and you know, very worthwhile discussion. I'd like to thank what was over 30 attendees at any one time, you know, joining us today. And thank you, Jamie, for opening up, you know, this talk in town hall. I think your presentation was spot on with where we came from and where we're headed to. And John, so skillful and moderating the discussion. I appreciate your participation and support.
Thank you. Well, thanks to all of you. Have a great one. See you soon.
Thanks, guys.